So tell me, do you love the circus? Do you love theater? Do you love acrobats? And are you from Canada or one of the people that speak French and that the country itself is basically a hotspot for a unique type of show that a lot of people know and love? Well, I got a special treat for you because today I'm going to discuss a very interesting era of shows that some of you may have known or heard about and that you may have seen in person, whether it's in a performing arts theater or an arena or even at a theme park. I will also be giving away my personal opinions on the shows themselves that I'll be reviewing here shortly. But what we're focusing on in this video is an era full of Cirque shows that my home park, Kings Island, had. So without further ado, let's get right onto it. So let's dive into what Cirque is all about. A Cirque show that you would find in any theme park is basically considered a Cirque-style show. And in case you don't know what a Cirque-style show is, it is basically a fancy French type of circus show with acrobatic performances and dramatic theater. They have performers that come from all over the place, not just America or Canada, but also France and Finland. Cirque has been a thing for a long time already, and there is such thing as a relevant theatrical Cirque show production company called Cirque du Soleil, which is basically Circus of the Sun in French, where they perform all kinds of Cirque-style shows in any type of theming based on their originalities. There have been touring shows across the US and Canada, even other countries as well, I'm pretty sure. And also the Cirque du Soleil attractions in Las Vegas and even Disney World in Florida. There's even another company that does Cirque shows for theme parks specifically as attractions, called Lee Productions Hoot Vol. The 80s, 90s, and 2000s were growing decades for both Hoot Vol and Cirque du Soleil, where they began their journeys that led to a modernized popularity. Cirque was popularized a bit more, not only in the late 2000s, but also in the 2010s because of that one episode from Phineas and Ferb called Cirque du Soleil, and also the debut of the Cirque shows at several Cedar Fair parks. Not to mention, did you know that Busch Gardens actually had Cirque shows in the 90s and 2000s? Pretty interesting fact. In response to Cirque's popularity, Hoot Vol went on to create its very own shows that would memorize all ages of audiences alike. Hoot Vol's journey began in Canada's Wonderland with shows like Skeleton Crew, which debuted in 2011, and another new hit, Cirque Ambiente, which debuted in 2012. 2 years later, however, with the success of those amazing shows, Lee Productions Hoot Vol decided to give the parks in America a try. Personally, I remember very well when Kings Island would have several companies helping out the park with the entertainment that they needed. And they still do to this day because the park itself just can't always create something by itself, which is very reasonable, especially based on what we learned from one of the SpongeBob episodes, Krabbyland, comparing to the god-awful Willy Wonka experience that turned out to be a disaster. Oh boy. Quite frankly, Kings Island is one of the first theme parks in America to obtain Cirque shows, unless you count Busch Gardens as some of the very first theme parks in the US to have Cirque shows in the parks across the country. And one of the venues that the Cirque shows ended up performing in was the one and only indoor venue, the Kings Island Theater. Now, the Kings Island Theater is one of the popular theater venues in the park that opened in 1976 and was formerly known as the American Heritage Music Hall, and later the Paramount Theater. Over the years, it has housed several Broadway shows, ice shows, musical shows of any kind, magic shows, Halloween shows, Christmas shows, and a ton of occasional events, including the Brady Bunch Q&A and some sort of variety show for Pride Night at one point, which was like back in 2013, since that usually performs in the Fest House. The KI Theater was even renovated and refurbished in 2004 to improve more sound quality with Dolby Digital Audio. I'm not sure if that's entirely true, but correct me if I'm wrong. After Ed Alonzo left Kings Island in 2013, the park figured that they needed different shows, and they had a great idea by having a contract with Lee Productions Hoot Vol, which began process around the same year the 2013 season was coming to a close. However, the surprise was kept secret when the 2014 entertainment lineup was 95% announced on KI Entertainment's Facebook page, until March 13th, 2014, when Kings Island officially announced that they would be getting a Cirque show for the KI Theater in the summer of that year. Unfortunately, I did not get to see any of the Cirque shows in person because of my sensory issues, particularly that I used to have, but I did watch the recordings of the shows on YouTube, and boy, do I have strong opinions on the shows that we had during my home park's interesting era. Apparently, Kings Island had a contract with Hootvall to have Cirque shows in the park, but specifically, it was basically 6 seasons in a 5-year contract. And it was quietly premeditated when Cirque was introduced to the park. And the KI Theater wasn't the only one to have Cirque shows, but the International Showplace also had one of the Cirque shows at one point. When Cirque first made its official debut at Kings Island, it started with an American version of Cirque Ambiente. So, Kings Island's very first Cirque show to ever perform in the park was Cirque Imagine, which came from its original version at Canada's Wonderland and had a beautiful scenery, delightful music, and interesting theatrical features. Opened on May 24th, 2014, it featured several acrobatic performances including a table, teeterboard, bike trial, surwheel, cord lease, including straps and silks, and a trampoline. The characters were 4 red guys, a biker, a white princess, and several stunt athletes with helmets and spiky hair attached to them. Well, not all of them at least, but you know what I mean. Honestly, even though I never got to see it in person, I thought Cirque Imagine was awesome for the way it was. And I loved every detail that they put in the show. The background, the music, the scenery, the variety of characters, and acrobatic performances. I mean, the show was just very popular by its standards. I mean, everything about it was just great, and it was advertised, like, everywhere. And, like, I clearly remember the announcement of the show that was spreading on social media before its debut at Kings Island, even throughout its time at the park. I remember it being advertised on the news several times. It was advertised at the front gate of the park. It was even advertised on Facebook, and while the show existed, there were times when the theater would be full, and the park actually showed that on social media a couple times, calling the KI Theater a quote-unquote full house because of how packed it would be. There was even a VIP preview for the show the day before its premiere, which was May 23rd, which was interesting even though I never got to attend it, but I saw photos of the event and I thought it looked really cool. Plus, when they returned in 2015, I'm sure that they were giving away merchandise when they kicked off their second season. Although I am not sure if that was true, but if it did, I'm sure it was awesome. It was actually rumored by the Cirque Imagine Facebook page itself. In the background, there is a circle tunnel in the colorful mountain backdrop with icy spikes, and I am really impressed with how they had actors and acrobats going in and out of that hole. The way the acrobats and designers of the show put so much effort in this production, from practicing the performances to enhancing the scenery, it makes it very rewatchable, and I barely get tired of watching it many times because of how awesome it really is, honestly. The only flaw it had in this version is that they didn't have some acts that were from other versions of the show, but I'm not going to complain about it. In addition to that, they didn't have a mime dancer in this version for some reason, and I wish they did, like what they had in the original Canadian version and also the other version of the show at Carowinds when it performed there. However, there was a rumor where someone claimed that the cast wasn't the nicest because they apparently banned someone from watching the show for some suspicious reason. Though I am not sure if that was true or not, but it was just from a comment that I saw on one of the videos of Cirque Imagine. Overall, through its American interpretation, the show made a lot of sense, and it actually did. I thought that Hootvall did a phenomenal job interpreting their show to the US properly. And quite frankly, it was very potential, which is why it expanded to other parks over the next few years, which it did. Interestingly enough, Canada's Wonderland recently brought Cirque Imagine back to its Canterbury Theatre last year, and it is about to return for its 4th season in its potential revival era this year. And as for myself, I'm gonna give Cirque Imagine a 10 out of 10. In honor of Cirque Imagine, Kings Island did something very unique for Halloween Haunt, and what they did is that they showed a lot of progress in bringing in a Halloween Cirque-style show in the US, although it was in the US before, like at Cedar Point, and it was extending to other parks as well around the time. This show, in particular, had not only acrobats and trampolines, but also several stunts and fire effects as well, and that was when they brought in the show Skeleton Crew, which didn't take place in the Kings Island Theater, but rather at the International Showplace, which is an outdoor theater venue. Now, it makes a lot of sense for the show to take place outdoors because of the fire effects that they have in the show. And this was also around the time when the original Hot Blooded was being phased out just for the show. Opened on September 19th, 2014, the show had multiple acrobatic and stunt performances, including the rollabola, aerial hoop, trampoline, and one of the other acts that I don't really remember that the show had at Kings Island. But I'm very sure that a few acts had several fire effects, basically. It had several stunt acrobats and skeletons, which made a lot of sense because, duh, Skeleton Crew is the name. You know, I actually watched a little bit of it in person while one of my family members and I were walking around a park a couple of times, but we didn't do it for very long. And yes, the show not only performed during Haunt, but also during the days on Sundays, which is quite nice for some people that didn't want to go to Haunt. However, despite myself not seeing the full show in person, I did watch the full show on YouTube a few years later, and wow, was it amazing. Although some people hated it because of one act that people did not like. And I do believe it was the Rollabola act, and they basically complained how one of the acrobats took forever in the act, as they called it a quote, stinker act. But if I saw the full show in person, I would have fully understood what they were talking about. But to me, I never disliked the show, and I never had any problems with it. It was what it was, and that's that. And believe it or not, did you know that some actors in the show at KI from 2014 were actually from Cirque that same year? I mean, I'm sure they had familiar faces, but like, who knows? Unfortunately, the show only lasted for one season because for some reason, most likely by popular demand, one of the directors of Hot Blooded decided to bring Hot Blooded back, which took him a year to do so and lasted for a little while before being quietly phased out in 2017. Overall, the Halloween Cirque style show that we got as some sort of treat was extremely fun while it lasted. And like I said, I'm gonna give this a 10 out of 10. I don't know, maybe an 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, but I like to give it a 10 out of 10 just because. 10 out of 10. After a successful 2-year run of Cirque Imagine, another Cirque show was created for Kings Island, but not as phenomenal as some of us thought it was. You see, there was a show that was originally going to be an interpretation of another Cirque show from Canada's Wonderland, known as Dimensions, which ran around the same time as Cirque Imagine at Kings Island, and I knew it was going to have a different name. And in March 2016, the name was officially revealed when it was confirmed that Origins, a Cirque experience, would make its way into the KI theater. Now, before it premiered, they actually had photos on the theater's exterior windows of what was going to be a proper interpretation of Dimensions. Unfortunately, that was not the case because a week prior to the show's opening, they somehow revealed what the show would look like. And boy, I thought it was horrendous, even at first. Opened on May 28th, 2016, and keep in mind about its opening date, May 28th was actually the same day that Harambe, the Sensei Zoo, got shot, and that really spread a lot of controversy on social media. The show had several acrobatic performances, including the sway pole, slackline, Russian cradle, juggling, double surwheel, a hula hoop act, a trampoline, speed painting, which wasn't really a Cirque act, but more than just a regular act when they turn one of the volunteers that get to go on the stage and become an elf for a little bit. And later the contortion and rollabola acts that actually replaced a couple of the acts, including the speed painting. There was even a bit of live music because they had a drum set and someone would go up there and perform on the drums, which apparently that was like one of the elves while the show goes on. And not to mention, this show also had some comedic moments. As for the characters, the only ones that the show had were purple ferrets, which one of them referred to as monkeys when they really weren't, and yellow elves. In its second year, in 2017, however, the KI version got a couple of goblin characters. One of them was a goblin with some sort of troll mask and looked like some sort of hunchback type of character. And the other was a shepherd lookalike, which, to be honest, I have no problem with any of the goblin characters, as they were just, quiet and they were just, characters themselves. Well, I gotta be real honest with you guys. I used to despise this show when it was around, like, very deeply. And looking back, it wasn't really awful as I would point out it was. And like, I think that the acrobatic performances and live music that they had were great. But the comedy of the show was just, it was just too corny. Even the acting was just a little bit off. And get this, it was quite a bit kid-friendly than being targeted to everyone regarding the comedy itself. And the way the characters sounded and acted, the way they made weird faces, I don't even know what to say, man. Plus, the music choices that the company made in the show, some were fine, but others were just kind of weird to put in the show. And now that I think of it, I thought the show itself wasn't awful, but the thing is, it was kind of bad, but mostly weird. As the show starts, there's a 10-minute pre-show where the ferrets come out and do a little bit of acrobatics and act it all silly by going through the audience and stealing some stuff, like shoes and hats and even cell phones. And I'm sure that they did this for fun and not to intentionally steal as a crime, because I'm sure that they brought the stuff back to the people that own those items and objects. But still, I think it's kind of weird to have your stuff ultimately stolen by a performer during a show like that. And plus, the way the ferrets sounded with their voices were kind of irritating because of how high those voices were. And then they go, Taco, Jocko! You know what I mean? And yes, as a matter of fact, the ferrets in the show were named Taco and Jocko. And then we get to the rest of the show where the ferrets open a portal with a ball that they get hanging from the ceiling, which was a light up ball. And they put the ball in the portal and it opens the background of what was supposed to look like a mystical jungle. And in my opinion, I think that the mystical jungle background itself looks like a combination of a childhood nightmare and a background of a one-time musical cast, as if it was some sort of like playhouse, just mainly because of a black backdrop and red stripes, making it look like a dark play place or some sort of hell-themed play area. Also, I would definitely say that the makeup is weird, and it almost makes the characters look like cats from the Broadway musical itself. I know I kind of repeated that differently, but you get what I mean. Plus, the balls that hung from the ceiling of the theater literally looked like a huge white ball sack, which I found that very awkward, and this literally questions me with this. Why the hell would you call the show a mystical jungle when you have so much weird stuff added to the theater that don't make it look like a jungle at all? However though, they did have purple branches surrounding the trampoline and the stage, plus some leaves to the texture of the setting. Now let's talk about the characters as well. The ferrets don't even look like ferrets at all. They look like very weird creatures. And the elves do look like what they're supposed to look like, but to me, they look like clowns in some sort of like yellow leprechaun costumes. And I'm sorry if I'm judging, but this is true. Sometimes the elves would sit right next to you, which by looking at the photos that some people took, that literally proves that. I find that to be weird, and I'm not going to complain about it, because, you know, it's just a show. And like I said about the goblins, I have no problem with those characters. We also get some scenes where the elves get cowardly scared away by the slackline getting cut, and one of the ferrets comes out with the scissors making weird noises. Even in one scene where they try to kiss, but one of the ferrets would ruin it, like as a joke. Even with one of the songs that the ferrets would sing, Ask a Muppet, you know, with the ukulele and such, and with the I thought that one was very weird as well. Even though it was just a song, I find that song to be weird because of the scratchy voice. Even though the song wasn't entirely bad, I just didn't think it properly fit the show. And also, what's up with the name of the show, Origins? I mean, come on. That name didn't make any sense for a plot where the creatures celebrate life in a mystical jungle. It's like origins are countries, and the definition of it is the point where something begins. As a matter of fact, quite frankly, that show represented none of that. Like, I think this clearly shows that the company had made a very weird choice for the name of the show. And like, from my perspective, it should have been called The Enchanted Cirque, since it took place in some sort of mystical or enchanted jungle. I'm not saying that it would need a bad name. What I'm saying is that the company that made the Cirque show could have done better. Now, the rest wasn't entirely bad, especially with some scenery, including a huge inflatable ball that was coming down from the ceiling, and how the ferrets get a smaller ball that they got from the ceiling and putting it onto the trampoline that lights up the branches. Honestly, I feel bad for the actors that had to go through the repetitiveness of corny humor because of some sort of terrible plot and script, but like, in the end, it's not their fault. And believe it or not, there was a fan base of Origins that was twice as huge as Cirque Imagine, but in the Kings Island community, strictly. Even in the Kings Dominion community. And I gotta admit, it was insane. Although this wasn't much of a hit, but it locally was. And people would go crazy on it. Like literal craziness. And say that, oh, it's awesome! Particularly the acrobatic performances, which I definitely get where they're coming from. And also some comedic humor and entertainment. And some would say that it was better than Cirque Imagine. Others would say it was cooler than Cirque Imagine, which I strongly disagree, and I always have. That I don't get why people think it's better than the other show we had. I just don't get it still. And with people saying that it's more rewatchable, I still don't get that because the show doesn't seem as rewatchable to me. Unless we count the music and the acrobatic performances, but other than those things, nah. Well, from my perspective, it wasn't even that awesome when the show goes ahead and ruins the reputation of another show that was going to be properly interpreted. And I'm not gonna lie though, but they did try to put on the best show that they ever could. And I respect that. Except, it was entirely my fault for kinda spreading the hate on it, because you're not gonna believe this, but I was the one that started a hate base on the show that no longer exists, and I honestly regret doing that. I only did that to maybe gain public attention regarding the local stuff that people should be more aware of, but mostly it was just to spread the word about theme parks generally, whether it's relevant or not. I was just having fun with it without giving a damn. In fact, there was someone who pretended to be in Origins that wouldn't try to let me give away my opinion on it, even if I never saw it in person, and that I was saying that I don't appreciate it in any way. Well, here's the thing. I'm really sorry that it came out very rude and disrespectful, but if I'm giving away my opinion, I'm giving away my opinion. Like, I'm not looking for trouble or any arguments from anyone. And she even tried to convince me to come see the show that she wasn't even in, and I'll explain that in a little bit. And in the end, I kept telling her no, no, I'm not going to see it, and I don't need to get a true feeling of it because of how weird and cringeworthy it was, especially from my perspective. And she got real upset with me in the comments on some of my videos by calling me names and such. And I said, whoa, yeah, because she was saying like, F you and sew your stuff in, because you know how I've had plushies from my videos? I said, whoa, and I even told her to calm down, but she did not give a damn. I felt like I was being stalked by some fan of the show, and that made me feel very uncomfortable. That's why I didn't go past the Carrier Theater as much in 2017, which was because of the fact that I was being stalked by a fan that I never knew. She even wrote me a message in French saying that I wouldn't even understand what interpretation is, and that I was, guess what you call me? A fatal loser, just for criticizing the show and even Who Evolved by saying how ungrateful that Origins was, just for giving away my opinion on it, even if it was a stupid opinion. Now, I'm not going to tell you what the person's YouTube account was, but I will tell you that her first name was Madison. And once she threw a hissy fit at me in the comments, I blocked her because I didn't want to hear anything back from her. And believe it or not, even the ones that didn't see it, she insulted others that ranted on the show. I'm like, bruh, really? You're just gonna go ahead and be a bitch about it? I just don't even know what to say. And pretty much, the fanbase was a little bit toxic, like locally toxic, but not as toxic as a lot of popular fan bases, like the SML Jeffy fan base, for example. And not to mention, I had a couple weird dreams about that show back when that show was around. In the end, there was another knockoff of both Dimensions and Origins, as we randomly had Cirque Canadian at Canada's Wonderland, and its similarity, Seasons of Cirque Carowinds. At least those shows, as well as Dimensions, had a lot more surprises in the pre-shows than Origins. Unfortunately, there is no full show of the 2016 version of Origins on YouTube, but like only a couple of clips, since they didn't allow videotaping because of copyright infringement in regards to the music that they use. There are other versions of the show from 2017 and even 2018, but like at King's Dominion, that were basically recorded as a full show. And I will have to admit that, to my knowledge, the show was weird and cringeworthy. The name was kind of bland and out of context. The characters were quite immature, not the actors themselves, even half the poor music choices. Regardless, I'm glad that King's Island continued its course with the Cirque-esque sequel, but I wish they could have done better and differently with the same proper interpretation that Cirque Imagine had. Like, you know, Hoot Vol made both Origins and Dimensions. A lot of Cirque shows and theme parks, those were all made in one same company. Hoot Vol. Keep that in mind. I'm not sure if everything from that was changed because of the final decision that the company made prior to the show's premiere, but if it was, then why? Which by that, I mean the interpretation from Dimensions to Origins. And with everything out of the way, I'm glad that King's Island got rid of that show after 2017. And the way I came out, though, as a teenager who was rude, selfish, and kind of disrespectful about the shows that I exceedingly despised and acted like some sort of critic, or some cases nostalgic critic, where I wouldn't care about others' feelings and that I overthought, those are what I totally regret doing. And here's the thing. For those of you who were involved in the situation, I am truly sorry for all of that. I can still give away my opinions because opinions are opinions and facts are facts. But with opinions, they're basically the opposite of facts. But I should have thought twice before doing that by seeing a show in person and getting my real opinion on it. And to be fair, I was very immature and kind of sensitive because I still had a bit of sensory issues around the time. Despite all of that, I learned 3 things from the time. I learned that the elves in fictional standards could actually be in other settings, like in a forest, because there are different types of them, not just the ones from the holiday traditions, like, you know, Santa Claus and all the elves for, like, you know, Christmas and such. The second thing I learned is don't ever judge something by not only its cover, but also to never judge something that you've never seen before. And I would like to briefly mention as well that with the third thing I learned is that you should never tell a woman to calm down. I don't know why, but I heard it's real childish, and People can actually stop you for that. And like I said, I could at least tell, especially by looking back, they tried really hard to make the best show they could. And they kind of showed a little more progress and effort in 2017 than they did in 2016. I guess I would say 4 out of 10. Not long after Origins died out, some teasers from rumors were rolling in about another Cirque show coming to Kings Island, and what no one knew was that it was the last one to perform in the park. I remember when my friend was telling me about what he heard regarding how this new show would focus on Gravity Defy, or Anti-Gravity Defy, and that it would be similar to Cirque Imagine, but more original. And yes, some people thought it was also similar to Origins, but it mainly wasn't, because like I said, it was more original. From then, Kings Island and Lee Productions' Hood Vol decided to create another Cirque show that would be considered more original, and that the idea of the show came out of nowhere, which was a huge step that those companies took. And with that, the third and final Cirque show that performed in the KI Theater was called Gravity, a Cirque Experience, which took place in outer space, but on some sort of unique planet. The show was confirmed in April of 2018 on the map touchscreens in the park, which, by the way, they actually used to have those. But it wasn't officially announced until the end of that month, making its debut on May 26, 2018. The show featured characters including an astronaut, 2 co-astronaut bikers, and colorful aliens that were red, which was a female alien, and male aliens, including 2 purple aliens, 3 blue aliens, a one-eyed green alien, which was basically a full-body mascot named Babette, and a black alien that did a laser act. The show also featured many acrobatic performances, including bike stunts, high bar, teeter-totter, rollerball, which, by the way, that act didn't last very long, a laser act, a mini hula hoop act, and a very long dance routine that comes along at the very end of the show. So, I'll be honest right here, that show actually did a lot to make itself a great show. Like Cirque Imagine and unlike Origins, the show had an actual plot, and it followed the show very well, even if they have different acts, regardless of how different the acts were. And everything about the show, including the setting, the background, the music, the acrobatic performances, the acting, and the characters were very, and I mean very well done. Although it was criticized due to its humor that some didn't find as great, and that some found it to be the weakest. But it was good for what it was. Even the pre-show that only occurred during its first year was interesting, where Babette and later a blue alien came out and walked around the auditorium before the show, but it was nothing silly. Although in 2019 they stopped doing the pre-shows for Gravity, and unfortunately from what I heard is that the actors that performed in the show during its second and final year, they allegedly worked for free due to a contract that was expiring at the time. Obviously that sounded like a red flag for the end of Cirque's time at Kings Island. Once again, it was quite popular and had a good fan base. And what was interesting is that towards the end of its first season, the park offered guests to go behind the scenes of the show, which is very cool. And there were even interviews with people that were fans of the show and loved the show, even if others are and were fans of it or not. Oh, and fun fact, Kings Island actually did sensory-friendly performances for Gravity and for the first 2 years, like throughout its entire run. Like, I'm dead serious, it was just throughout its entire run. Unfortunately, I did not get to see Gravity in person, but I did try to see it in person because of how cool it was. Although it was not because of my sensory issues, I was growing out of them before then. Like, I couldn't make it because of what I heard regarding the seating being limited, and we were more focused on the rides. I've had a very busy life, and I couldn't go see it whenever I would go to KI with my grandma, because apparently she likes to spend time there half the day and then leave because she would have other things to do for the rest of the day. And this was like every time I would go there with my grandma. I did, however, get to watch the clips online the first year, and as the full show in its second year. Despite the fact that I did not get to see it in person, I was amazed by how well that they did with the show. Now, looking back, and now that I think of it, while I find the show to be awesome, it does feel like it wasn't as the best like Cirque Imagine was. Like Origins, it wasn't as commercially advertised, but regardless, it was still beloved for what it was. Plus, I thought it was a lot better than Origins, because I did find some of the characters to be a little funnier, and they made the show feel like a mixture of the 2 previous shows, but better. What sucks also is that when the show came to King's Dominion in 2019, it only performed for a year, because the following year, it could not perform because of COVID. And as for Kings Island, thankfully, this was not the dead end for theater productions in the park. And at the end of the day, the park had a good run with the Cirque shows. And as for Gravity, regardless of how weak it was, I still give it a 10 out of 10. So this was an unfortunate dead end for this era, because on August 18th, 2019, Gravity had its final performance, and in 2020, it was confirmed that this was the true end of the Cirque era, as Lee Productions Who Vol left Kings Island permanently. Oh, I miss Cirque. Nah, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I really do miss Cirque. Originally, one of the famous magicians, Brad Ross, was going to perform in the park, but he couldn't because of the global pandemic that put everything on hold. But afterwards, Brad Ross instead moved over to Carowinds last year to perform his own magic show that is relevant in a lot of standards. So instead, we got the Phantom Theater Encore that performed during the park's 50th anniversary. And it did have one acrobatic performance, but that was it. And it performed from like 2022 to 2023, and the show had since been gone. So this year, the Kings Island Theater is getting a different type of show called the Gazillion Bubble Show, which will be a lot more kid-friendlier than what we're used to. And it will unfortunately have a shorter run due to budget cuts, so I don't really think it's going to be that interesting. At least for me, it isn't. Overall, after reviewing every Cirque show that performed at Kings Island, the era that the park had in the mid and late 2010s, and the shows that they offered in the era were quite interesting and wild. Even as every show had a plot or storyline, I'd say that Cirque Imagine focused on the guys performing the acts while discovering other stunt acrobats coming out of the mountain, and one of them follows the White Princess but doesn't get out until the very end. Skeleton Crew didn't have a storyline, but it focused on talented actors and acrobats performing mesmerizing acts and stunts, and the show actually looked cooler at night. While Origins didn't connect with what should have been about, it involved the ferrets and elves performing acts in the forest and partying throughout the entire show, while trying to get a ball that lights up, and to basically complete their home. And like I said, it also included a little bit of live music and a little bit of humor. And Gravity focused on the astronauts landing on this mysterious planet called Planet 3268, and encountered the aliens that performed acrobatic performances while discovering the planet. Yeah, it was just quite wild. But like I said, it was just very interesting for what and how it was, because honestly, I knew that Kings Island was just trying to offer a lot of great entertainment that it had. 90% of the time it did, but 10% it didn't, especially from my perspective. But since the Cirque era is in the past, I'm not going to constantly complain about it. I just want to give my opinion on it, because I wish Kings Island could have done better with the last two Cirque shows, but at the end of the day, you know, there's just nothing we could do about it. And who knows, maybe one day we'll see Kings Island bring one of the Cirque shows back. Well, if they get another contract with Who Vol, but I highly doubt that, because basically Kings Island's going through some like very serious budget cuts at this point, especially in the entertainment department. And if they were to do that, I would say that they would have to do that in 2025 if they were to bring Cirque Imagine back. And if they want to do Dimensions in the US, I really hope that they do that as well, and not Origins, because that show was just out of context to begin with. But like what one of the singers in Linkin Park says in one of the songs, in the end, it doesn't even matter. So that's it, guys. Yeah, I really hope you understand this whole process and concept, and even the history and evolution of the Cirque era that Kings Island had, and how it put a lot of impact on the showgoers. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, give a like and subscribe. Comment down below, tell me what your favorite Cirque show was, and if you like Cirque or anything about Cirque, and maybe one day I'll get to see a Cirque show in person. But until then, this is me, Byron, the Multiple Interest Man, also known as Byron Hazlett, signing off. Double peace, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.